Hello everyone. Today we're going to see JavaScript Promise in terms of execution context. And we shall have the full picture of JavaScript Promise. And we shall also dive into the official V8 project in the GitHub, which is basically the engine of the JavaScript. And we shall have a total clear picture of Promise, how it is actually implemented. So let's get into that. Okay. So here, as you can see, this is basically JavaScript environment and this is a browser and node environment. Okay. So these two environments, they collaborate with each other. We already know that. And here is our global execution context. Okay. And here is a piece of code. We shall execute this piece of code line by line. And here we have this call stack, this event loop, and this microtask queue and callback queue, basically two queues. Okay. And for the promise, how all of this work together, we will see while the execution goes on. Let's start the execution from the first line. And this is basically console logging before promise. And we know that this is our global. Inside the global, the execution is starting. So in the call stack, we have a global function. Okay. So let's write that. So here it is basically console logging before promise. So let's console log before promise. Okay, so we have our before promise console log. Now the execution will move to this line, basically this one. Okay, and here we are declaring a variable promise, which is basically holding the promise object. Okay, so let's declare this variable. Basically, let's store this variable in the memory promise, and it will have basically a promise object, which will have several things. One is basically result, and another is on fulfill reactions, which is nothing but an array. Okay. So this promise will basically hold this result and this on fulfill reactions. This is basically an array. And how does it work? We will see that. Okay. So let's move our execution. And we know this promise callback is basically, it is called an executor. So this executor will execute immediately. So here in the call stack, we shall have the executor. So now this executor function will execute. Basically here it is console logging this inside promise first. Okay. Now the execution will move to this line. And here we already know this set timeout function is a facade function. And facade function does not do anything in the JavaScript environment. Rather, it passes this work to the browser and node environment. We already know that. Okay. So what it will do basically, it will pass this callback function here in this environment. And here it will wait for 5 seconds. Okay. All the time ticking will be done here in this environment. And in this environment, it will continue the execution. And here it is console logging inside promise last. Okay. So it will just console log inside promise last. Okay. Now the execution will move out of the executor because executor function is done. So it will be removed from this call stack, of course. Okay. So it is being removed. And this execution is here now. Basically, it is console logging this after promise. Okay. This after promise. So here it will console log this after promise. Okay. Now the execution will move. Execution will move to the next line. And here it is calling this then function. So this then function, what it will do basically, it will first check is the promise pending or it is not pending. If it is pending, it will simply put this function inside this on fulfill reactions. Basically, it will save this here in this reactions. Okay, in this array. If it is not pending, either it is resolved or rejected, in that case, it will directly put it inside this microtask queue. Okay. Here our promise is pending because the resolve is not called yet. Resolve will be called after 5 seconds. Here it is waiting. So it is pending. So what it will do basically, it will put this function here in this onFulfill reactions array. Okay, so let's put that. It will be here basically this function. So this function is basically this function. So now the execution will move. Execution will come to this point. And here it is console logging in the end of promise. So it will simply console log here in the end of promise. Now the execution is done. There is no more code in the global. Okay. So what it will do after 5 seconds, here this browser and node environment, basically this environment, they will put this into this callback queue. So let's think our 5 second is done and it will put it in the callback queue. And you already know that the event loop is always checking this call stack, whether there is any more function in the call stack at the top. If there is not, it will check is the global execution done. Global execution is done. So it will check the queues. First, it will check the microtask queue as it has higher priority, and then it will check this callback queue as there is nothing in the microtask queue. And here it saw there is a function in the callback queue. So what event loop will do, basically it will take this function and it will put it inside this call stack at the top of the call stack. Okay, so let's do that. It will be here at the top, and as it is at the top of the call stack, this function execution will start, and it is basically resolving this hello. Okay, whenever this resolve is called, whatever value it is resolving, that will be put inside this result. Okay, so this hello will be inside the result. So let's do that. It will be hello basically. So here we have the hello. Okay. Now what this will do, basically, whenever a value is resolved, immediately it will also put these functions inside this microtask queue. Okay, this will be done automatically. So what will happen, basically, this function is basically this function. So this will be here inside this microtask queue. Let's scale it to be down. So this is our function in the microtask queue. And this function will be removed from this call stack as it is done. Okay, so let's remove that. So this is gone. Now the event loop is always checking. Remember, it saw there is nothing at the top of the call stack and global execution is done. So now it will check the queues. So it saw first the microtask queue and it saw there is a function. So it will immediately put it inside this call stack. Okay, so let's do that. Let's put it inside this call stack. So now this function will be called, and this data, it will be basically whatever inside this result, it will be injected or it will be put inside this data. Okay, this is the data. So it will basically console log this data, basically this hello. So let's console log hello. Okay, so this is how it works. So our this function's execution is done. So it will be removed from here. The call stack is empty now, and our execution is done. So this is how the promise works. Now we will see how the promise actually implemented inside the V8 engine, basically JavaScript compiler. Okay, so and we shall have a clear understanding how that actually works. So far, what we have seen, that's enough to be honest, but that we will see as the documentation. Okay, so let's get into that. So it's gonna be very exciting. We'll get into that. And if you have not subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button. Let's first look at the official documentation of MDN. Here you can see basically the promise. And if you read the things here, you will see that most of the things that I've already discussed, basically this promise is state pending, fulfilled, and rejected. You will see them. You will see the workflow of the promise. And there are basically few functions you can see later, like this promise.all, promise.all.settled, promise.any, promise.race. What do they do actually? They basically take a bundle of promises. So if you want to run a bundle of promise together, then you can use these functions. Okay, so let's see some of these functions like this promise.all. So here you can see basically these three promises, promise 1, promise 2, and promise 3, and they have put this inside this array. Okay, and if all of them fulfills, then this promise will fulfill. If any of them is rejected, it will be rejected. This is how this all works. Okay, and this all settled, this one works like when all the promises are settled. Okay, this promise is fulfilled. Okay, and for the promise.any, basically if any of the promise is fulfilled, it will be fulfilled. Okay, and promise.race, so basically here you are running multiple promises. Okay, so they are racing together, and whoever will settle first, if the first one is fulfilled, the promise will be fulfilled. If the first one is rejected, the promise will be rejected. This is how it works. Okay, so if you go into that, here you will see that basically these two promises, promise 1 and promise 2, they are basically racing together. together. And promise 1, it will take 500 milliseconds, and promise 2, it will take 100 milliseconds. So this will finish first. Okay, both of them are resolving. Okay, but this one will finish first. So that's why it will give this output 2. Okay, basically this value, it will resolve that. Okay, so this is how it works. Now, if you read the documentation, the things that I have discussed, basically the result, the then function will be put inside the fulfilled reactions, that you will not find it here. Okay, so if you want to see that, you will have to go to the official project of the V8 engine, basically, which is developed by Google. Okay, which is basically the compiler of JavaScript. So let's get into that. So this is the official V8 project, and we will see inside this how it actually works. So before that, let's put our windows side by side so that we can visualize better. So here you can see the windows are side by side. So here in the V8 project, in the source built-ins, there is a file called promise_constructor.tq. Now, when this promise constructor is called, basically this promise constructor function, in this file there is a function called promise constructor. That function is actually called. Okay, and this file is inside the source built-ins, and here you can see the extension of this file is the tq torque file. Okay, what is torque? Torque is a new programming language developed by the V8 team to work internally. It is basically transpiled. The Torque language is transpiled into the C++, just like TypeScript is transpiled into JavaScript. Okay, so this is how it works. So let's get into this file and let's find out the constructor function. And here you will see there is a file called promise constructor. This is the function. When you call this function is actually called. Okay, and we are passing this callback as an argument. So inside this function, there should be a parameter, like here you can see the executor. This is the executor. Basically, this executor is this function. Okay, and this executor is supposed to be called inside this function, constructor function, because we know that at the time of the creation of the promise, it is executed. Okay, so it is supposed to be called inside this function. So let's see that. So if we go down, we will see there is a call of this function. Here you can see this executor function is being called inside this, and it is passing this resolve and reject. That is why you are getting this resolve and reject as arguments inside the callback function. Okay, now you can see the full picture, how it is working, why is it working. Okay, so I think this executor thing is 100% clear now. And this variable, it is basically holding whatever this function is returning, basically the object, promise object. And I said that this promise object is basically holding this result and these reactions. So let's see what is this function is actually returning. Here you can see this function is actually returning a result. What is this result? If we go up, we will see this result is basically this JS promise. What is this JS promise? Let's see that. So for that, we have to go to this source objects, JS Inside this, we have this class, basically JS promise. Okay, and this is the type of that result. Okay, and there is a very important variable here, reactions or result. Okay, this is nothing but this. These reactions are result. Now I have shown here basically two things, result and reactions, two separate things. But under the hood, they have used only one variable for that. Okay, and see, this is union of promise reaction or JS_any. So for the result, it can hold any value like number, string, or boolean, anything. Okay, and also it can hold the promise reaction, basically this reaction, this function. Okay, so as I have said, they have only used one variable to hold the result and the reactions, and keep this in mind. Okay, we shall need it in a bit. Okay, so we have understood this promise, basically this constructor and the promise. Now let's see the implementation of this then function. Here, if we go to the source built-in promise.then_tq, we'll see there is a function basically called promise prototype then function. This function is basically a facade function. It is calling another function and passing all the tasks to that function, which is basically this perform promise then implementation. So let's see this function. Okay, so here in this file we shall have that function. So let's see that. So here you can see this function and see the thing I said basically. If the promise is pending, then it puts this function inside this reaction array basically. Okay. And if it is not pending, if it is resolved or rejected, then it will be put directly inside this microtask queue. Now see, it is checking if the promise status is pending. If it is pending, then it is creating a reaction basically with this unfulfilled function. This function basically, it is putting that reaction inside the reactions or result variable. See the variable that I talked about basically here. Okay, here it is putting that reaction, basically this function. Okay, but what if it is resolved? What if it is not pending? In that case, this else block will be executed, and here it is checking if the status is fulfilled. If it is fulfilled, it is creating a microtask. Okay, then in the end, it is putting this microtask inside this microtask queue. Okay, basically this one. So now you can see how they actually implemented all of this. Okay, but in our case, the promise is pending, so it will put it inside this function, basically these unfulfilled reactions, this reactions array we say. And when the resolve will be called after 5 seconds, two things will happen. One, this value will be set in the result. Okay, and this function will be put inside this microtask queue. So let's see the implementation of the resolve. So here in the source built-in promise resolve.tq file, here we will see the promise resolve implementation. So let's see that. So here is our resolve promise function. Okay, and this function is actually calling another function which is fulfill promise. Let's see that. This is the fulfill promise function. Okay, so this is doing all the work. So let's see that fulfill promise function. So here inside the source built-in promise abstract operations file, we will see that fulfill promise. So here is our fulfill promise function. So when the resolve is called, this basically does all the things. So here, if you look at this is the most important thing. See, read the comment number 3, 4, and 5. Okay, it is basically saying that set this value to this promise result. Basically, it is talking about this. So this value will be set, this hello will be set here in the result, and the fulfill reaction set it to undefined, and reject reaction set it to undefined. Basically, these three things are being done by just one line. See, this is the line. Here we have this reactions or result variable. This variable is being set by this value. Basically, this hello. Okay, we already know they have used only one variable to save the reactions and result. So if we set the value, automatically the reactions will be removed. So that is why these three comments they have said. So we can see the value is set basically here. In the result value is set. But what about this reaction? This reaction is supposed to be put inside this microtask queue. But the reaction was set here. But there is no more reactions here, only value. So for that, they already saved this reaction, basically these reactions inside this reaction variable. And they call this function TriggerPromiseReaction. Inside that, they pass this reaction. This function is basically putting this inside this microtask queue. So let's see that function. So here inside that same file, we have that implementation. Here you can see this TriggerPromiseReactions and see what it is doing basically. It is calling this function morph and enqueue promise reaction. So this function is basically sending this to the microtask queue. If we go into that, we'll see that implementation. I don't want to go into that anymore. Okay, so here if you read the comment, it is saying morph the reactions into the promise reaction job task and push them onto the microtask queue. Okay, so basically this function is doing the task. Now you have seen the full picture of this promise thing. You have seen the implementation, how it is actually implemented under the hood. So I challenge you that you will never have such kind of experience with AI. And to be honest, I have not seen any kind of video about promise showing how the VA team actually implemented the promise. And subscribe to JS Faculty and hit the like button. Okay, this is really important to us. And take care of your health, keep growing your knowledge, and keep applying your knowledge. Bye-bye.